There comes a point in your career when you may find yourself asking a question that you never thought you'd have to ask. God, what am I supposed to do now? Maybe you've spent 10, 15, or 20 years building a career. You've earned the degrees, you've developed the skills, you built the resume, you've worked your way into positions you once prayed to have. And then something changes. Maybe you get laid off, maybe the industry changes, maybe you realize that the career that you once loved doesn't fulfill you anymore. Or maybe nothing is necessarily wrong. You simply just have this persistent feeling that God may be calling you somewhere else. And that's scary because changing careers at 25 is one thing. Changing careers in your 40s or 50s after you've spent decades building a professional identity can feel completely different, right? I know it because I'm living it real time right now. And so today, I want to talk about career transition from a biblical perspective, okay? Not just on how to find a job. I want to talk about how you discern whether God may actually be redirecting your career, okay? And so how do you know when it's time to move? How do you distinguish God's direction from your own frustration? How do you start again when you've already spent years building something? And something that's probably most important out of all those questions I just asked is how do you trust God when you can't exactly see where he's taking you? And so for years, my professional background was in corporate America. I've worked in marketing, consumer insights, client development, and business strategy. I've done all the things. Okay. I built expertise. I built relationships. I built a professional identity. Okay. And then I lost my job and I spent roughly like a year and a half kind of trying to figure out what came next. Okay. It's a rough job market out there, y'all. And so when you've spent years building a career, losing your job doesn't only affect your income, it can affect your identity. Suddenly you're asking yourself, who am I without the title? Who am I without the company? What happens to everything that I've worked so hard for? And here's another question, especially if you're coming out from corporate America. Did I waste all those years? And then there's, the question that doesn't get talked about enough. Am I too old to start over? I found myself confronting that question in my 40s. I'm 44. But something that I've learned through this experience is that there is a difference between starting over and starting from nothing. Okay? Vastly different. They are not the same thing. When you're starting over at 40, 44, 45, 50 or beyond, you're not walking into your next chapter empty-handed. You're bringing experience, you're bringing wisdom, you're bringing relationships, you're bringing mistakes that you've learned from, you're bringing skills, you're bringing resilience. And so you're bringing everything that God taught you in the previous season right here and now. And that's why I want you to stop looking at a career transition as though you're throwing away your past, because that's simply not true. Okay. Sometimes God isn't asking you to throw away what you've learned, right? He's asking you to use it somewhere new. And so if you look throughout the Bible, you're going to see this pattern repeatedly. Moses spent years in Pharaoh's household and then years in the wilderness before God called him to lead Israel. David learned responsibility and courage while tending sheep long before he became king. Esther found herself in a position she probably never imagined, only to discover that her position gave her an opportunity to influence the future of her people. And last but not least, let's not forget about Apostle Paul. Apostle Paul's education and communication abilities did not disappear when his life changed. Those abilities actually became quite useful in spreading the gospel. Different people, different assignments, but the principle is the same. And I want you to recognize this. God can repurpose your preparation. Again, God can repurpose your preparation, right? That realization is what changed how I looked at my own career. So now instead of working in the corporate world, I'm teaching business and entrepreneurship. God repurposed the skills that I learned in the corporate world. And so those experiences don't like suddenly just disappear and become irrelevant just because my job title changed. They become resources that I can bring into my new career. And so maybe that's something that you needed to hear today, okay? Your resume may tell folks where you've been, but it doesn't get to decide where God takes you next. And so I know a lot of you may be thinking, how do I know if God is actually redirecting me? Right? What if how do I know if God's redirecting me? And so I want to be really careful about this part, okay? Because I don't believe that every bad day at work means that God's telling you to quit your job. No. Okay. And your manager, that's a couple fries short of a Happy Meal that may be irritating you that day, doesn't necessarily, that doesn't necessarily mean divine confirmation that, yeah, you need to leave. And being bored doesn't automatically mean that it's time to resign. Faith doesn't mean that you're making reckless decisions, okay? And then expecting God to clean it all up for you. That's not what it means. So if you're wondering whether you're supposed to make a career transition, I want to give you a framework. And I've been thinking about this more and more lately. Here are 3 words I want you to repeat. Pray, prepare, pivot. Okay? Pray, prepare, pivot. So let's talk about step 1, pray. Before you change your career, all right, examine your motivation and ask God, why do I want to leave? Am I running away from something or am I being drawn towards something? And that's a very important distinction, okay? Because James 1:5, to be exact, tells us that if we lack wisdom, we should ask God who gives generously. So ask him, okay? But don't only pray, God, get me out of here. And I'm going to be honest, I'm guilty of praying that prayer on more than one occasion, okay? So I want you to start praying instead, God, show me what you're trying to teach me. Show me whether this season is ending. Show me where my gifts could be used next. Show me whether I'm supposed to move or whether I need to grow exactly where I am. And then pay attention, okay? What opportunities keep appearing? What burdens keep returning? What gifts do other people consistently recognize in you? And what kind of work energizes you? What problems do you naturally want to solve? What opportunities align with the abilities that God has already developed in you? So, career development isn't always one of those dramatic moments where God announces the answer. Sometimes that direction becomes a lot clearer as you move closer to Him. And I can definitely attest to that. Okay. Step 2, prepare. So this is where I think like a lot of Christians, sometimes misunderstand faith. Okay. We hear take a leap of faith. And I don't know about you, but I oftentimes imagine jumping off of a cliff with absolutely no plan. Okay. But preparation isn't a lack of faith. Let's get that clear. Preparation isn't lack of faith. Preparation can be an expression of faith. Jesus talks about in Luke chapter 14 about counting the cost before building. And so there is wisdom in preparation, okay? Maybe God's calling you to something different, and that's wonderful. But now I want to ask you, what do you need to do to become prepared for it? Do you need additional education? Do you need to update your resume? Do you need to research salaries, right? Because you don't want to go out there underpaid, right? Do you need to try something part-time before making a full-time transition? You don't necessarily have to quit tomorrow, right? Your first act of faith might simply be researching what it would take to make that transition. And so I want to say something especially to the woman who has been praying for a change but hasn't done anything different. Okay. Prayer and preparation belong together. Prayer and preparation belong together because you can ask God to open the doors while simultaneously getting yourself ready to walk through them. Step 3, pivot. Eventually, however, preparation has to become movement. And this is where fear tends to show up for a lot of people because they can research all day long because research is safe, right? Planning is safe. Talking about your dream is safe. Well, in certain spaces, all right? But movement actually creates a risk. And so Ecclesiastes chapter 11, verse 4 warns us that whoever watches the wind will not plant, and whoever looks at the clouds will not reap. And so, in other words, if you're waiting for the perfect conditions, you may be waiting forever. In fact, you will be waiting forever. Not maybe, you will be. Okay. And so I want to say this to the person that needs this right now. Okay. You may never in a million years feel 100% ready. You're just not going to. You're not going to feel 100% ready. You might still be scared when you press the submit button on that application. You might still have questions when you enroll in the program. You might still wonder whether you're making the right decision by accepting that position. Courage isn't the absence of uncertainty, okay? Sometimes courage is simply obedience while uncertainty is still present. And so this is for my folks that are like, but Tasha, I've invested too much to leave. I get it. I got you. Okay. Maybe your issue isn't knowing what you want. You already know, right? Your problem is that everything you've invested in your current career, right? You've spent 15, maybe 20 years doing this. Maybe you've earned promotions. Maybe you're finally making good money. And maybe everyone knows you as the person who does that thing, right? Oh no, that she's the one that's on it with the accounting. She's good with finance, whatever it is, okay? And so starting somewhere new is a humbling experience, right? Because starting somewhere new means that you're becoming a beginner again. And I understand so much why that feels uncomfortable. But I want to ask you this. Just because you've spent 15, 20, 25 years building something, does that mean that you're required to spend the next 15, 20, 25 years maintaining it? No. Those years don't simply disappear just because your direction changes. If anything, you get to take all those lessons with you, right? And so sometimes maturity means recognizing that something can have been right for one season without being right for the next one. And so I want to also speak to my folks that are like, you know what? I don't know. I just feel too old. And so this is directly for especially my women that are in their 40s, 50s, and beyond. Okay. You are not too old to pivot. There's no time limit on this. Okay. Your age doesn't disqualify you from beginning something new. In fact, you may be more prepared now than you would have been 20 years ago. At least that's how I feel. Okay. And you know yourself better. You've survived things, you gained some wisdom along the way, right? You've made mistakes. You've developed judgment. You've learned how to communicate. You've learned what matters to you and what doesn't matter. Okay. And hopefully, above all of what I just listed, you've developed a deeper relationship with God. And so I don't want you to compare your beginning to somebody else's middle. Okay. That's an unfair comparison, and comparison is the thief of joy, right? Do not allow social media to convince you that everybody figured out their purpose at 27. Okay. Just please don't. All right. And some of us, hand held high, Some of us have multiple chapters, right? Some of us have multiple careers. I know I do. Some of us will discover that the very thing that we thought was the destination was actually the preparation. And I can definitely attest to that too. So, this may be one of the biggest lessons that God has been teaching me. Your job can change, your title can disappear, your company can restructure, an industry can change, a paycheck can stop. And if your entire identity is attached to those things, whew, losing them can make you feel like you've lost yourself. But the Bible tells us, you know, the Bible gives us a different foundation. It tells us in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10, that we are God's workmanship. We're created in Christ for good works that God prepared for us. And so notice that your identity isn't senior vice president. It isn't teacher. It isn't entrepreneur. It isn't consultant. Those are roles. And it took me a minute to really hone in on that. Those are roles. Those are not your identity. Okay. My identity doesn't suddenly become more valuable because I'm successful in corporate America. My career may change, but who I belong to doesn't. And I think we all know, I belong to God, right? And so that gives us this immense degree of freedom because when your identity is secure, you're able to ask, God, where do you want to use me now? Right? Instead of, God, how do I hold on to this version of myself that everybody already recognizes? Okay? Because you can't grow that way either. So here's 5 questions that I want you to really ask yourself before changing your career. Okay? I want you to seriously think about these questions before making the career transition. Number 1, what exactly am I trying to leave and why? Okay? And be honest, because sometimes you might just be having a bad day. Doesn't necessarily mean you need to change careers. Okay? Number 2, what am I being drawn toward? Don't only identify what you dislike. I want you to identify what actually interests you. Number 3, which skills from my current career can travel with me? Because a lot of us don't realize we've got so many transferable skills, but no one's ever told us, or we just haven't had the time to sit down with ourselves and, identify what that is. So I want you to write down those skills because you may discover that you're much more qualified for your next chapter than you actually thought. So number 4, what preparation would make this transition wiser, right? Do I need more education? Do I need a certificate? Savings, networking, experience, research? I need you to identify it, okay? Identify it. And finally, number 5, what is one step that I can take in the next 7 days? Notice I said 7 days, not next year, not eventually, 7 days, okay? Got to put a time frame on it. Maybe it's updating your LinkedIn profile. Maybe it's applying for one position. Maybe it's reaching out to somebody in the industry that you want to get into. Your entire future doesn't have to be figured out before you take the next step, okay? And I want to remind you that your leap doesn't have to look dramatic. It just doesn't, okay? And I want you to really remember that because I know a lot of us, we love dramatic testimonies, right? I quit everything, followed God, and everything changed overnight. That's not going to happen for a lot of us, okay? It's just not. It's just not. But sometimes, and many times, I shouldn't even say sometimes, honestly, the majority of the time, obedience is not going to be that dramatic. It's just not. Sometimes obedience is going to look like, filling out that application after work, right? Sometimes it's going to look like taking a class on a Saturday or maybe asking somebody for advice. And sometimes it may look like finally admitting, you know what? I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. And I get that, right? All of that is okay. You don't have to resign tomorrow, okay? But today, I want you to stop pretending you don't want to do something different. I'm walking through my own transition right now. You are looking at someone that is going through a career transition in real time. All right. Do I know exactly what this chapter of my life is going to look like? Nope. Do I have every answer? Absolutely not. But that's where faith comes in. So faith doesn't require me to know everything that's coming. That's the beauty of faith, right? It requires me to trust the one who does. And the one means God, right? So if you're standing between what was and what's next, I want you to remember the 3 words: pray, right? Seek God's wisdom before making the decision. Prepare. Do the practical work necessary to become ready for the opportunity that you're asking God to provide. And then I want you to pivot. When it's time to move, don't let fear get in the way and keep you permanently standing in place in fear, because permanently standing in a place that God may only have intended you to occupy temporarily is going to delay you from reaching your destiny. So let's not do that. All right. Your previous career wasn't necessarily a mistake. All right. Your previous season wasn't wasted, and starting again doesn't mean that you're starting from scratch. Okay. Maybe everything that you've learned up until this point has been preparing you for what comes next. And so I want you to ask God one simple question: God, what are you preparing me for next? So if this message resonated with you, please be sure to share it with a friend, subscribe to the channel, and remember, if you're everything to everyone, the risk being no one. You never know who you will inspire. See you in the next video.